If you're tuning in, you're watching KBC Channel 1 and this is Good Morning Kenya. I'm Regina Manyara Gita, and now we want to focus on the social economic impact of Kenya's tax relief measures. This came alive some few days ago after the president amended to the Tax Amendment Bill 2020. Now, to just look at the gains, long-term and short-term, we have an expert this morning, and that is none other than the chair of ICPAK, that is Rose Mwaura, to just help us look at what these tax relief measures mean in the long term and short term. There's been a lot of talk, especially some saying that they are more of post-COVID, while others are arguing that some of them contained there in the tax relief measures are a bit contradictory. We hear from an expert this morning, and we want to remind you that we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube on KBC Channel 1 TV, so do get online. We appreciate your feedback. Start with your name and tell us where you're watching the program from, and just basically what you think about government's interventions in as far as tax is concerned. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Regina.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Now, Kenyans were a bit excited, especially after the speech on Labor Day, just hearing the president saying that indeed the Tax Amendment Bill 2020 now is alive because president assented to it. But now, from where you sit, in a nutshell, let's just start from there. What do you think about the tax relief measures?
They were quite interesting measures because the government appeared to give with one hand and also to take back with the other hand. So from an overall point of view, perhaps the impact on the economy might not be that big. Mm-hmm. So perhaps some of the biggest winners, I would say, would be, for example, the turnover tax. The turnover tax was reduced from 3% to 1%, but the more important thing is that the threshold was actually increased from 5 million to up to 50 million. So if you're a company or an individual with earnings of up to 50 million, you can actually now apply turnover tax at 1%. Of course, this does not include professional fees, rental income, or management fees. And then for really small businesses or individuals who are earning up to 1 million shillings a year, they are then exempt from taxes because now they don't fall. Previously it was 500,000.
500 to 1 million.
Yeah, now it's been increased to 1 million in terms of the lower threshold when you start paying turnover tax.
So from where you see, these are just the immediate gains that you can look out for. Now let's go maybe bit step by step to help a person who might not know what was contained in the Amendment Bill 2020. So we start with the issue of exclusion of individuals earning less than 24,000 per month, to be excluded from the income tax bracket. What impact will this have? Maybe from an individual point of view and from a corporate point of view.
So it's a really, I would say, interesting because, first of all, so we now have, I would say, pay as you earn. Anybody who's earning below 24,000 shillings now will not be paying any pay as you earn. And we were doing some calculations. For example, somebody earning about 100,000 shillings will take home an extra 6,000 shillings. However, on the other hand, you have quite a number of other increments. So for example, let's say VAT itself has been reduced to 14%. But then you find that, for example, petroleum, there's 8% levy on petroleum. Before that, the base for calculating that 8% did not include excise duties and other levies. So
actually,
that means that petroleum is going to...
There, because I was
yes.
about to ask you, because it was about to come up, in
yes.
that we are seeing that in as much as with the reduction of PYE, especially for those who earn 24,000 and below,
right.
that means money in the pocket.
Right.
But now, there's no correlation or does not commensurate with the other policies that have been put in place. And we'll come to that, especially on the issue, because Kenyans, when the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority gave its new figures for last month, Kenyans were expecting a reduction, a huge reduction on the cost of fuel, given what is happening in the global oil prices. Now the issue of excess duty being also factored in the calculation of pricing of fuel. We've jumped the gun, we've moved from the issues.
So I was just trying to say that there might be some offsets. So you might take home 6,000. If you're earning about 100,000, you might take home some 6,000 shillings extra. But you might have to pay that back in terms of the cost of some of the prices, because petroleum has a direct impact on manufacturing cost.
True. So it's a balance. We'll get to highlight the balance as we go on. Now, we've talked about the issue of the reduction of turnover tax from 3% to 1%. It just came into effect in January, and the taxman did not see, many people did not come on board for this. And there was a lot of argument that, hey, with the withholding tax, presumptive tax, now you've reintroduced turnover tax, which is not previously there. That's a bit too much for businesses. Some businesses have come to say that this reduction of turnover tax from 3 to 1% does not necessarily hold water for them, because businesses right now are not making profits as such. They're just trying to, stay afloat. What's your take?
So perhaps let me just go back slightly to the issue of pay as you earn. We have to keep in mind that the people who are in the pay as you earn bracket are very, very few. We have about 3.5 million people who pay taxes. So perhaps those 3.5 million or slightly less are the ones who would benefit from the pay as you earn. We also have about more than 16 million people in this country who are daily wage earners. So they have to leave their houses, go earn their 100, 200 shillings and go back home. Those ones will not feel that impact. So yes, initially when ICPAK, when the issues of COVID hit, and we saw how businesses were going to be impacted, we had made certain suggestions to the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury. And we were looking at it from two angles. One, the first angle was, of course, to keep people safe. Human life is very critical, to keep people safe and not to get sick. But for you to keep people safe in this country, you also have to, one, provide those same people with something to eat and a way to pay to earn their keep. Then that brings in the issue of business. So we looked also at what can the government do to help businesses continue operating, continue paying these people. So there needed to be some form of economic stimulus, cash stimulus to businesses, similarly to what we've seen in other countries, in the US, in the UK, in South Africa, to allow businesses to continue operating and continue at least paying wages. A lot of businesses in this month of April have either laid off their employees, and coming into March, they'll also lay off. So even when you have a reduction in turnover tax and you don't have any revenues coming in, it's really not going to help much in terms of continuing to sustain the economy.
The government, in response to that, especially on the economic stimulus, they said that Kenyans need to lower their expectations over them, especially when it comes to that stipend, to support business and also individuals, saying that currently the economy cannot sustain such. Are you saying that we could? Is there an avenue? Would the economic stimulus, the recommendations that you had made as a firm, as ICPAK, what avenues had you looked at? And when you say economic stimulus, what did it entail?
So, of course, as a country, we're almost we're in between a hard place and a rock.
Yes.
At the end of December, our debt was about 6.5 trillion. Yes. Remember, we raised our debt ceiling to 9 trillion. Yes. But we looked at other ways. For example, government could guarantee some loans to give businesses some soft loans. And those soft loans would actually be paid over maybe, I don't know, up to a 3-year period or something of that sort. And that those loans would actually allow businesses to keep, to be open and to continue paying their staff. We've also looked at what other countries have done. Of course, the issue of what you call the increasing the quantitative easing in other countries like the US. I think they've printed like $2 trillion of dollars to give people and businesses cash. The UK has done something similar to even continue giving business access to credit. So we looked at that. We also looked at areas of extending, for example, tax payments. Any tax payments that were due April 15th or June 30th, whether those could be pushed up to September or, through December. Of course, we realize that we have the issues of tax that are coming up, but we had also made certain suggestions to the government as well. One of them was on the issue of government to approach its lenders for a moratorium. So, for example, out of our debt service, 33% goes back to China. Can we talk to China to actually give us a moratorium of up to a year on some of this debt? I know that the G20 countries are meeting this week, and hopefully there could be some debt relief coming out. But one of the other key things that we'll find out here is we actually, for example, last year in 2018-2019, we actually spent 16.2 billion, which is almost 1.4 billion shillings a month on travel by counties and national government, and perhaps more when you put in the national government. So when you cut back on such unnecessary expenditures, we could probably pull out some of money that can then come back to supporting the economy. Traditionally, we've had this budget of about 3 trillion.
Yes.
Can we cut back on that and just focus on what is necessary? And so there are different ways of looking at this. There are options out there.
Now, because the government, with the current tax relief measures that have been put in place, has actually tackled the issue of VAT and PAYE, pay as you earn, that is it.
Right.
And this happened to be government sources of main revenue sources. Right. You're already talking about, there's the option of asking for a moratorium from China, at least for 1 year. How do you think the government is really going to bridge this deficit? Because definitely there's going to be a deficit for this budget in terms of, COVID was something that no one had planned for. How do you think the exchequer and government is going to try and balance that?
To be honest, I would not want to be in the shoes of the cabinet secretary.
It's bad, yeah.
As we sit here today, it's going to be really difficult to bridge this. You've already heard that the collections for January, February were fairly low. And we expect that those collections, already our ICPAK members are calling, and even government saying, people are not ready. The little cash that business has, they actually want to hold on to that cash today, as opposed to going to pay their taxes. So something has to be done about it, because there's going to be a huge deficit. I can see that from even collections. And unfortunately, maybe KRA might just get a little bit more aggressive in terms of tax collection. But even when you get aggressive in terms of collection, when a human being has to choose between putting food on the table or going to pay taxes, for sure, putting food on the table might end up winning, or a lot of businesses will just shut down.
People are preferring to, take care of themselves before doing their civic duty. You must.
You have a family. They're looking up to you for food. You have to shelter and everything. So people will actually look at that. So and I know that Treasury is already. I think there were some suggestions to maybe not pay some interest on some of the bonds and so forth. So I think the government is exploring. I also know that they are exploring discussions with the World Bank consortium of organizations to borrow up to 275 billion shillings to try. I think last week they floated a bond of about 50 billion shillings for budgetary support. But of course that might not be enough, given that our budget traditionally has been at about 3 trillion shillings, out of which we've been able to finance 1.6 trillion from collection. There's a huge deficit.
Yes.
So we must really tighten our belts as a country so that we're not just spending willy-nilly, that we focus on just spending on what is essential.
You go through the books. That's what accounting is all about. Yes. From where you sit, and, government expenditure has been, highlighted as one. There are so many loopholes. It has been identified as our weak link. And as far as how we spend in terms of physical planning and policy, it's affected there in terms of how government spends the monies that it actually collects from Mwananchi. And Mwananchi has been saying that things need to be done. From your end, where is the loophole and how can we tighten our belt? Because it's right now we are not doing business. Business is barely surviving, and we have to pay our taxes to support government and government operations. How do we tighten our belts from the top?
I think from the top, it really starts from a budgeting perspective, because we've been told that about a third of our budget goes to waste through corruption and other means. So we must start by actually coming up with a budget that is very, very lean, that only focuses on what are the priorities. And in this case, our priorities will be things like healthcare, will be things like education, how do we keep children continuing to learn, and another priority is going to be on business. I don't believe we have focused enough on business to allow small businesses, the mama mbogas, to continue operating on a daily basis, so that, because when they operate, then they are able to, it's what you call stimulating demand. When a business is still operational, it'll employ 1 or 2 employees, or 5 or 10 or whatever number. Those employees will earn something. When they earn something, they'll go out to the supermarket or to the mama mboga and they'll buy some goods, of course, which will mean that the manufacturer can continue manufacturing.
Yeah,
right?
Stimulating demand. We've seen the government giving yesterday when he was giving his speech, Cabinet Health Secretary there, Mutahi Kagwe said, and he said he was actually disappointed, and the government is disappointed given now the reopening of hotels, and Kenyans are taking advantage of that and just not abiding to the laid down guidelines. And he said the reason why government did, or rather took such a step, was to continue generating demand and supporting some industries as it could. In this current situation, we've seen people going back to work. Do we have the right discipline? Do we have the discipline? What is lacking? We have high numbers and we're still doing business.
Of course, there are a few people who don't have the discipline. You've heard about stories of people who are being caught drinking in bars, in houses, or that are locked behind. So there are a few people who don't have the discipline, and I believe the government can deal with these individuals. But in terms of people working, I think in the last 2 days we've seen almost everybody come back. Not everybody, a lot of people come back to the 2 cities, and there's no way. It's difficult. Maybe it's not there's no way, but it's difficult to ask people to stay at home. And they've been at home for from
a month plus,
April 16, a month plus. Yes. Okay, maybe 45 days. Yes. Their savings have been depleted. So you cannot ask somebody to sit at home when they don't have something to feed their children, right? So we must find a way to balance. I think some hard decisions have to be made, and it cannot be, the budget that we're coming up with cannot be a business as usual budget, because we have to find a way to stimulate economy, to get businesses back to working, so that they can now employ people, and people can then put something on the table. Or if we don't do that, then there's no way we can then ask people to stay at home, because they'll still come out to look for something to eat.
Very well said. Now, you've mentioned something about the budgeting process, that it has to be different. Last year's budget focused on the government's, or rather the president's big 4 agenda: food security, manufacturing, housing, and universal healthcare. From where you sit, what are the priorities? What areas should we give priority during this budget making? I know you've mentioned this issue of supporting business, but what other key areas do we need to really focus on during this budget making process?
So the way I look at it is that we need to focus, one, on food security. Food security is going to be very, very important. And you need to look at it even from the smallholder farmers, from how food is transported, how it's stored, so that, and of course we remember we're also dealing with the issue of the locusts.
Yes,
they're still there.
Toxins.
And the locusts are still there, it's just that they're not in the headlines, because now the headlines are all about COVID. So I think the issue of food security, the food security agenda needs to be very critical. But there has to be a way to make sure that whatever money we're setting aside actually is getting to the farmers, whether it's in terms of subsidized inputs, and in terms of just storage, the whole supply chain, to be able to get food to people. I think the issue of technology as well is going to be very critical, because when I was thinking about who are the big winners when it comes to, I mean, there are always losers and winners in
this situation.
Yes, and I think technology are really part of those big winners, because issue of working from home, other technological, if in fact,
any spending in terms of transport.
Exactly,
now
the digital payments. How do you buy your stuff online? Can somebody deliver it? So companies that are agile from there are going to be the big winners. And then, of course, healthcare needs to be a really, really big focus. When we look at healthcare, for example, right now we saw a notice for healthcare workers wanting to go on strike because either they don't have adequate PPEs, and also a lot of healthcare workers being infected. So we must focus on getting in as many testing kits. So right now we're seeing such an explosion in terms of the numbers, but we're also testing more than 1,000 people a day, right? So that's going to be important in terms of testing. It's also going to be important to have healthcare facilities upgraded and workers, and not just in the cities. Remember, a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, will first of all go to the small clinics. Those small clinics actually need to be part of support so that they know how to deal and to even have how to deal with people. Again, big winners have been manufacturing. We've seen that when we're faced with shortages, we know that we cannot buy masks from China or PPE from China. Kenyans have actually turned around and even repurposed their factories to be able to manufacture some of these masks. Of course, it's unfortunate.
The issue of lower supply, demand, and supply.
Exactly. So we can actually do this, and if the government can commit. And we know KEBS has actually certified some of these masks or this equipment very quickly. Within a 3-day period, you get your certification, you can start manufacturing. So this is great. And we need to be able to extend it to pretty much all areas of our economy in terms of manufacturing.
Now, you've talked about key areas that we need to focus on: health, issues of food security. Now, let's zero in on food in general. The way it is, the amendments on the VAT Act. Retain some of the, to retain some of the essential items such as milk and milk products, as well as bread at zero rate. How will this affect pricing? I know you've said it's a bit of an oxymoron. We need to get a balance. It's taking and giving on with the other hand. And also, let's focus on the issue that you also brought up, just around that issue of VAT, the issue of medicine and vaccines. Now that how will this impact on the healthcare system? Because now they're now exempt and not zero rated.
So from a VAT perspective, we have several regimes. We can be zero rated, or you can be what is known as exempt, or you can be standard rated, which is now 14%. Now, when you're zero rated, it actually means that no VAT is charged on that particular product. And I know that there had been a push to make bread exempt. So when you're zero rated, no VAT is charged on that particular product, and even for basic milk. However, the manufacturer can then claim back that VAT from Treasury.
Yeah, Treasury.
As an input. Now, when you are exempt, it means that the manufacturer cannot claim back that VAT, which means that the manufacturer's cost goes up, which means that the manufacturer then has to pass it on.
Down to the consumer.
So it's unfortunate that you saw medicines and vaccines being exempted, and even masks. They were then moved from standard rating to exempt, which means that their costs are going to go up because the manufacturers are not able to. So that's an unfortunate. It would have been good to retain them at zero rating. There was a push to also push a lot of products, including agricultural inputs, bread, milk, to exempt, meaning that their prices would have gone up. But I think that was then overturned by Parliament. And we hope that they will not be brought back into the finance bill, which is going to be released today. But even at ICPAK, we're ready to fight such if they are brought back. Because normally when a bill is released at ICPAK, we actually take a lot of time to study it, and we provide our input based on what is going to be good for the economy, for the business, for the common mwananchi. And we also do a lot of lobbying with Parliament to make sure that some of these changes that are not good for the country are not passed as well.
Now, the manufacturing sector has already shown its worth at this point, more so at a better, it couldn't have been a better time. But now the issue of the electricity rebate that was initially there is no longer, has been removed, electricity rebate from the manufacturing sector. What impact will it have on this sector that has, has shown a rather proven its worth during this uncertain times of COVID-19?
So it's interesting that, when we started, we said that the government had given with one hand and taken with the other, right? So, for example, manufacturing is a good example. So when you look at, so for example, sorry, I've lost my track of thought over there.
Let me just try and take you back.
Yes,
we're just looking at the manufacturing sector. We've already said that we've seen a huge change.
Yes.
And they have come up, like the manufacturing, the local industry has put its best foot forward, right?
Yes.
But now, in terms of its interventions that the government has given, in these latest tax and relief measures, it took away the electricity rebate that was actually put there to lower the cost, operational costs, so that now this lower operational costs would trickle down to the consumers. Now it has been taken away.
Yes, so of course, one of the good things is that it's almost an eye-opener that we can certify a lot of products quickly from KEBS. We can repurpose our factories to manufacture a lot of things, quite quickly. However, you are right to say that, for example, the 30% tax allowance for electricity was taken away. We also have other critical allowances that have been reduced. For example, what you call industrial building allowances have also been used to previously get about 100% or up to 150% in that industrial building allowance if you are outside of big cities. That has now been reduced to about, I think, 50% in the first year, and then 10% on a reducing balance going after. So, of course, this means that some of those allowances that were for business will also go away. So yes, so it's the same thing. It's good that maybe the businesses will increase, but also their costs will also go up, and also the exemptions. If you're not able to pass through or to actually claim some of your VAT for products that have been made exempt, it also means that some of your costs will go up. So it's really an issue that business has to take hand in hand. So, for example, I do chair the Legal and Regulatory Committee of the National Chamber of Commerce here in Kenya. So one of the things we are also really looking at is the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, which has given some advice, some input into this. Also, people like KEPSA and KAM have also given input, because sometimes some of the policies that are effected have a direct effect on, it's only the business who actually knows how that will impact them, and this feedback needs to be given back to the government.
Okay. Now, we had earlier on tried to touch on the issue of fuel. Fuel literally affects everything from transport to, just even the manufacturing sector itself. Now, Kenyans have been asking, and after the 14th of last month, they were expecting a reduction in price of fuel to drastically go down, given what is happening on the global scene. Now, from a tax point of view, is that now the inclusion of excess duty in the calculation of, calculating VAT for fuel. How has that, what role has it played, in ensuring that, rather keeping the prices of fuel at that point where they are, which I tend to think, in my opinion, are a bit too high, given the current level?
Right. I mean, one of the things we have to realize from a fuel perspective is that we buy our fuel maybe more than a month in advance.
Yes. Because
remember, it has to be shipped from wherever it's being shipped. So there's always a 1 month lag. So I know Kenyans woke up very excited.
Yes.
They were reporting, the price of, I think, fuel hedges is below zero,
yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
But that might not bear into our pricing until middle of May, right? Because the fuel that we're using now had been bought either in February or in March.
Actually, in February and March.
In February and March, when the prices were pretty high. So we do expect some reductions in the price of fuel in the month of May. However, this will be offset, because one of the things I pointed out was that the base on which the VAT on fuel is calculated has been expanded, which will include excise duties and other levies. So that means that maybe if it was 100 shillings before, and now with excise duties it's 115, you're calculating now on 115, hypothetically, as opposed to 100 shillings. So that actually increases your cost. So that could, so I don't really know. We will not know until the 15th of May, when the ERC actually comes up and tells us what the new pricing is going to look like. But hopefully we'll get some gains from the reduction in the global prices of oil, but we have to wait and see.
Now, let's come to the services sector. Is that Parliament now rejected the proposal to have brokerage services exempt from VAT, meaning that they're going to be paying VAT. And the argument that government put forth was that the sector has come of age. We're talking about the NSC and the stock market and so much more in as far as the services, or rather brokerage services, now going to pay VAT. Insurance and the like.
Yes.
What impact will it have on these brokerage services going forward?
Of course, the initial impact is that it's going to increase their costs, because remember, all these brokerage services, whether it's insurance, the stock market, they actually work on very thin margins. So one, they'll pass on those costs to consumers, to the users, who is really the public. If you're going to buy insurance, that ultimately may then be passed on to you as the consumer. So that definitely that will have an impact on the cost of services as we see it, because then any company that is getting taxed, then especially if they're not able to claim these taxes from the government as input taxes, then what they do is they just pass on.
Will that affect the volatility of the market?
I'm not sure if that will really affect the volatility of the market, because even at the moment the market has been quite subdued. And the big players who are normally the overseas investors, a lot of them have also almost sitting on the sidelines, actually waiting. And with not many Kenyans having cash in their pockets, you might not see a lot of Kenyans then investing in stocks at this particular moment. So it's really left to the big players at the moment, and who might not really, feel that 14% as much.
Yeah. Now, is the reduction of corporate tax an incentive enough to, to deter or rather dissuade corporates or rather private firms from layoffs and redundancies? What do you think?
No, it's not, because, corporate tax is really taxes on last year's earnings, and it's been a reduction of 5%. If you have, and remember that there's been no waiver in terms of payments, or rather at least deferring the payments. The payments are still due. They were due on April 15th. Will be due on, by June 30th when your taxes. When we don't see that waiver, so companies still have to set aside money to pay their taxes. One of the requests we had made to Treasury was to actually waive or extend the period within which taxes will be paid, so that to allow companies to have more cash flow. So that's not going to help. I think what companies actually need is some soft loans, some guaranteed loans. So, for example, the government had proposed that some sort of moratoriums that the banks could give. But remember, this also just that it would have been good to make it mandatory for...
Other than just a pronouncement.
Yes, but now you have to go one by one to the bank. The bank can choose whether to give you that moratorium or not. And even when they give you the moratorium, they're still accruing the interest. That's still accruing, so you'll still pay that interest at the end of the day. So some of these, yes, some of the measures could be helpful, but I'm not sure whether they're going to be enough to actually allow companies to retain workers. Because remember, if a business, most of business don't have a lot of cash that they have in the bank to continue paying people. So if you don't have cash coming in on a daily basis, then you're going to be forced to lay off, because you cannot pay people from what you don't have.
Now, just in a nutshell, from what I've heard is that we are in limbo, and as far as the tax relief measures, some are good, some are bad, long-term, short-term, and in essence that their recommendations that you had made, including the extension of payment of these taxes. Now, from where you sit, you're waiting to find out what the finance bill is going to be all about. But we have already said that the issue of accountability, especially in how government is spending its monies. What role have you taken as ICPAK to ensure that, the transparency and accountability, both at the national and county levels at this point?
So at this point, one, from an accountability perspective, we continue to talk to government and just encourage all levels of government, both at the county level, at the national level. Of course, our members work at the various levels of national and county government just to make sure, and we continue to make sure that, encourage them to continue to adhere to, their ethics and professional ethics and so forth, and to make sure that we are only paying for what we incur. So accountability, we're paying for what is necessary and at the right price, and that we also make sure we must account for all this money, because right now, a lot of money gets used on an emergency basis, but we must make sure that all the controls and all the proper authorizations for the funds are actually done. And of course, anybody who misuses government funds does need to, because it's really public money, does need to face the law around that. But as I said, critical thing is accountability, but also very critical is that government must relook at its expenditure and must cut out anything that is not necessary. And so we also applaud the fact that people not traveling is a good thing, because you don't have all these shall I say, county government people, movements, traveling overseas, doing what, and spending money unnecessarily. So that is also important, but we also need to look at cutting out all other unnecessary expenditure. And this is just for everybody, not just government, even a small business. You must relook at what is your unnecessary expenditure, and you must cut it out, or else you'll not survive.
Very well said, and we'll want to end that conversation. We have been having a conversation with an expert, basically the chair of ICPAK, that is Mwaura, saying that it's not just about a business, it's also about what you have yourself as an individual. You need to look at, prioritize your spending, save more for the future, because it remains uncertain. Remember, COVID-19, the cure is still unknown, and so far the country has 535 confirmed cases and 14 deaths. This is a time when we've been asked to be extra vigilant.